Welcome to the Revision Wizards podcast. I'm Miss Catherine M.H., and with me today is V.E. Griffith. This is episode 5, and today we're talking to Jeff Elkins, the dialogue doctor, and we'll be talking to him about character voice. And speaking of voices, like the last episode, my audio just went bloop and decided to cut out in the middle of it. So you get to watch, if you're on YouTube, Jeff making fun of me and me having to mimic what he's saying. So thanks for indulging us, and I hope you have fun watching this.
We do have one big announcement to make. We have our first patron, so we want to give a big shout out to Mary. Your support is really, really appreciated. We think it's amazing, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the Revision Wizard Slack. If you'd like to join Mary and support the podcast, you can check out all our rewards at patreon.com/revisionwizards. And now, on with the show. All right, well, I'm V.E. Griffith, and this is the Revision Wizards podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Miss Catherine M.H., and joining us today and having more fun than should be allowed is the dialogue doctor, Jeff Elkins.
Yay! Friend for years, friend for tears, in order to quote a weird thing from Hoosiers. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, we
before
always
you ask me a question. No, before you ask me a question, I have to know what the pins on Catherine's hat are. There's 2 pins on her wizard's hat. I need to know.
I have a little typewriter on this side, and this one says right.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, they give some kind of weird magical balance to your hat, which is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had others. I just got to get them on there.
Nice. Sorry. Hey, I asked you before we came on if I could just completely derail the podcast, and you said
absolutely. Feel free. So. The only thing that we ask every guest is, would you please tell us your pronouns?
Oh, he and him.
That's okay, great.
Question. Nice, excellent question. Yeah, I appreciate that you ask everybody too, because there's a weird thing in the world where like you only ask people who are gender diverse, and that's just as bad as not asking. So don't do that. So I appreciate that you ask everybody. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to it because this is, we're new, but that's something we want to do because I agree with you. Okay, so
yeah, you're new, but you're coming out of the gate like a rocket, baby. You're taking off. Woo! Zoom!
It's magical.
It's magical. It's marvelous. It's wonderful. Sorry.
Go for it.
All right, I'm ready. Questions. Let's go. Hit me. Aaron's giving up. Aaron's like, I'm done. I'm out. I surrender already. Jeff has won the podcast in 4 minutes. Yay! Sorry.
No worries. So you are known in the writing community as the dialogue doctor.
Ooh, that was a scary sentence. How you're going to finish that? You are known in the writing community as... okay, the dialogue doctor. Okay. We're good. Sorry. I'm known as the dialogue doctor.
Community, you're known as. No.
Yeah. Okay. I'm known as the dialogue doctor. That is true. Sorry, I cut your question off. I apologize. I will behave.
No worries. No, you won't. So what is your writing process?
My writing process involves a massive amount of anxiety and stuffing emotions, eating tons of ice cream, until finally I surrender and then actually go put some words on the page. That's just being honest. No, I'm writing process for fiction or nonfiction because they're different.
Let's start with fiction.
Let's start with fiction.
Okay. I'm a really heavy plotter. So I've done 13 novels. Every novel starts with a specific scene. So I'm a big scene guy. Like I don't know what it is I think in scenes. So I need a very emotionally charged scene. So for example, right now I'm working on a novel that is I'm actually working on 2, but I'll do that one. I'm working on a novel and I have a scene with 2 teenagers on their mandatory lunch break, and they've made a garage door opener that can tell if someone is a robot or a human. And they're in the park pointing the garage door opener at people, betting on whether they're robots or humans, like playing a little game. And then the robot cops show up because they're not supposed to be doing that. And they run away. So like that scene is going to become a whole book. So I get a scene first in my head. That scene typically involves characters. I can usually pull at least a minimum character arc from that scene. Like, oh, I like this character. I like this voice. I can see the journey in my head that I'm going to take that voice on. And then I use a spreadsheet to knock out all of the beats. So I then like plot every scene. I'm not stuck to that sheet. Like I'm not like obsessed with it. Like now that I have this sheet, I can't go away from it. But that's where I start from. And then I just start writing the scenes one at a time. A lot of times, like, I'll start a scene and then it takes a turn and that impacts all of the scenes down line. Sometimes I'll start a scene and like a character will show up in the scene and I'm like, oh, that character is missing from the cast. So then I have to like go back and like rebuild a little bit to put that character in. And I am not a like, write a vomit draft and then go back and edit. I edit and write at the same time. So I write a scene and then I immediately like I'll get up and walk away for 5 minutes and then I immediately come back and edit. So by the time I'm done with my first draft, it's really my second draft. I don't ever really finish a first draft either. I get to about the 3/4 mark and then I go back and I start rewriting. Because when I get to the 3/4 mark, I'm like, okay, I now get like the ending I planned is never the actual ending of the book. So I get to the 3/4 mark and I'm like, okay, now I know how this is going to end. So then I go back and I edit all the way through and then I finish the last quarter of the book. That's my process. I don't recommend it, but that's what I do. Yeah. And it is very exciting.
That's cool.
It's very like,
you're a writer. That's why.
It's very like, it's very full of self-doubt. I don't really like a dark night of the soul unless it makes me cry. If I'm not crying when I'm writing a dark night of the soul or a low point, then it's garbage and it needs to go away. It has to be redone. It means that I haven't actually like pulled off what I'm trying to do. So that's how I write. I need to be emotionally engaged to every scene. I need to have an emotional connection to every scene to be happy with it. Yeah. So I'd like to say that like I'm now writing a nonfiction book on this process that I call Pain, Agony, and the Ecstasy of Spreadsheets. But I haven't had a breakout novel. I'm a grinder. I've had slow, steady build with every novel I have. So this isn't working. I don't recommend anybody do this process. If I had sold like Harry Potter, I'd be like, this is how you do it. But it's a painful, messy, filled of self-doubt, weird process where I'm never happy with any scene until it actually makes me feel something. And then some scenes I just give up on. I'm just like, well, it has to be in the book. I should also say I do write dialogue-centric drafts. So every draft I write is a conversation. There even fight scenes. Like I write my first series was a supernatural thriller about homeless superheroes that fought monsters from another dimension. It's a fantastic idea that nobody wanted. Nobody asked for, nobody wanted. And I was like, here it is anyway. Those don't sell great. So so I was like, you know what people really want in Captain America? They want him digging through the garbage looking for his breakfast. That's what they want. They want Captain America in a dumpster. Nobody wanted that. So anyway, I wrote it anyway. But again, for me, it's the emotional attachment. Like there was something very emotionally engaging that I wanted to say about poverty and about like, let's get real about like what it looks like for somebody that's trying to do good in the world but doesn't have a paying job. Like what does that actually look like? So living that like one of the heroes is a 13-year-old kid and he just gets the crap beat out of him, and there's a scene, The Dark Night of the Soul is a scene where his like adult partner, who's supposed to be like taking care of this kid, the kid's like in the front seat, the passenger seat of the car that they own, that they park on top of a parking garage because they don't have anywhere to live. And the kid's like laying in the front seat clutching his teddy bear. And like, that's, for me, I need that like emotional charge to be happy with the scene. Again, readers have not given the stamp of approval in mass in this effort, so I do not recommend following in my footsteps in my weird plotting experiment. But that's how I write fiction. Oh, dialogue centric first draft. So I envision every scene as a conversation, and I start with the conversation. I used to write just dialogue only, so like I'd write just like the dialogue, and then I'd come back and so it looked more like a screenplay, and then I'd come back and have to fill it in. That wasn't because I was doing something intelligent, like, oh, this will bring the dialogue out first. That was just because like I only heard the conversation, so I'd just like write the conversation, and then I'd be like, I kind of gotta put context around this, and like you need to know where they are. So so then I'd go back and I'd fill in the rest. But I was doing that just like in a weird, like, oh, this is how I think and write. And then I ran into somebody who was like, no, that's the way a writing teacher taught me to write dialogue. I was like, oh, that's cool. I just did that by, the absence of any formal training. So that's how I write. But now I don't have to do that anymore because my scenes are dialogue centric regardless, because that's how I taught myself to write. So that's like a 10-minute answer that should have been a 2-minute answer. You're welcome.
No, you're fine. So would you say that your process has changed a lot from that first book all the way up to where you are now? Like, were you doing I'm editing as soon as I'm done with it, or were you writing it and then you've learned your process works better with editing as
The
you go?
process hasn't changed, but I'm way more efficient. So I used to spend like a week on a scene, or 2 weeks on a scene, like just working the same scene over and over and over. Just like, I got to get this scene right before I can move on to the next one. Now I kind of know what I'm looking for before I come into a scene. So I'm like, okay, so it skips a lot of the like wandering around trying to find the heart of the scene. Like now, so it's not that the process has changed for me. It's just gotten a lot faster. And my first, I think that's true of all of us. My first novel took me a year to write, and it was garbage. And then I rewrote the whole thing, so it took 2 years for me to publish. And then my second novel took a year, and then after that, it was like 3 months, and I can knock one out. I will say though, I don't know why I do this, but I do get very emotionally invested in novels. And so I have to take a 2-month break. I can't write one novel and then just start writing the next one. I'm too like emotionally exhausted. So I write one, I publish it, and then I start plotting the next one in my head. What I start doing is I start looking for that like critical scene that's going to define the book for me. And like I'm like, okay, so like I've got the scene in my head for the two boys. I might write that one next. The other scene I have in my head right now and I say they're in my head, I've actually put them on paper, but the other scene I have right now is, I'm working on this like rom-com treasure hunt. I don't know. I grew up watching Jewel of the Nile with my mom and Romancing the Stone. They're like these two weird Michael Douglas movies.
No.
That were like, the idea was like these are romance novels come to life, like back when like people kind of mocked romance novels before we realized that all romance writers were billionaires. But like when we were like romance Harlequin novels, so they made these two movies that are like, this is what a realistic romance novel is like. And so the lead woman, who's, man, I can see her face, Catherine. I can't remember her last name. I'm not calling you Catherine. Her first name is Catherine. So I can't remember her name, but she was in the movie. She is actually a romance writer who's stuck, and so she like goes on this journey, and she runs into like Michael Douglas in his prime, not old Michael Douglas now. That would be weird. And he's like, big and strong, and like they go on this adventure together. I really loved those, so I'm working that in my head. Like, I wonder if I can write a novel that matches that, like Romancing the Stones. Yeah. Also, the problem with my writing is that it's very genre bending. I can't sit in a genre for more than 3 books, evidently. So that's also doesn't sell great. Don't do that. These are all this. You can title this podcast episode "Things Jeff Says Don't Do." Don't do that. Don't do what Jeff does. Yeah. You guys got to cut me off. I'll
So
just keep
Aaron
talking.
and I
I'll
were
just keep
talking
going with it.
about,
I'll just keep talking about it.
yeah, I'm cutting
Okay.
you off now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So Aaron and I were talking about some different things that we've noticed with your writing, and we've noticed that there isn't a whole bunch of internal dialogue. Do you write internal dialogue? Do you hate internal dialogue? I'm someone who uses it
It's
heavily,
garbage. No,
I do
with
as well.
italics.
um,
And I italicize it, just so you know. I know that's a thing against you.
my absence of internal dialogue isn't because I like it or don't like it. It's just that it literally has to do with my lack of education. So like, um, I was not until I started the Dialogue Doctor. Like, well, no, that's not true. Well, about a year before the Dialogue Doctor, I was really like, you know what? I need to expand my understanding of books. I was dyslexic, Miss Catherine. I know you and I share that. I was dyslexic and I really struggled in English class. Like English in high school and college was the worst. Well, first off, I went to a
Hmm.
wonderful school that I will, you know, die to defend, but my inner city New Orleans education wasn't the best. So like I took AP English in high school and we read The Once and Future King and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in a year. That was it. We read those 2 books the entire year. And I remember I went to my AP English teacher and I was like, yo, what? I'm ready to take this test, this AP test, get some college credit. And she was like, you're not prepared. I was like, well, I got an A in your class. And she's like, this is the list of books you should have read. There's like 30 books on it. I'm like, I read 2 of these. And she's like, yeah. It was like, so I went to college. I had to do remedial English classes in college because I didn't know any grammar. Um, And I remember the first paper I wrote in college, the professor was like, write a true story about your life. So I wrote this story about this time that I got pulled over by, what was the question again? I'm just kidding. I remember it. I wrote this story about this time I got pulled over by, I was in a van with a bunch of my friends. I grew up in an all predominantly African-American neighborhood. I was in the van with a bunch of my friends and we got pulled over by the cops and, they like cuffed us on the side of the road. It was a big mess. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. It was terrifying. Like it's the first, not the only, but the first time I had a gun in my face. Like it was just a terrifying moment for a 16-year-old kid to have an adult man stick a gun in your face. So I wrote about that because he was like, write something that like, he was like, write about a memory that you still think about that's true. And so like I'm a 16-year-old kid. I've left New Orleans. I'm in Texas in school. And I'm like processing. I wrote that. He wrote on the top of my paper, he's like, F, I said a true story. And so I was like, fine, I'm done. I'm done. I didn't like
Wow.
English anyway. I'm done. I don't like any of you guys. So I didn't write anything. Like I avoided English and writing um just terribly. So all that to say, when it gets to inner thoughts, it's not that I don't like them. It's just that I was poorly read. I read Grisham. I read Clancy. Um, I'd read books here or there that people would give me, but they really did fall in that kind of like legal, sometimes military thriller. But I don't really like guns. Go back to the story about them in my face at 16. So like I'm not a fan. So yeah, so I just didn't. I didn't read enough to know that like, oh, inner monologue was possible. And then when I started writing novels, I was like, I should expand my knowledge. If I'm going to write novels, I should read more novels. And that's when I first started encountering inner thought. So it's not that I don't like it or that I don't do it intentionally. It's just that like that's not where I was groomed as a reader. So it's not what I know how to do. But I do I really respect it. And I do wish I could do it. I do think the thing about inner thought and now that I'm now that I've edited I think I'm over 250 now. I haven't counted recently. I was like 239 a couple months ago. But now that I've worked with a ton of authors, and a lot of them use inner thought, I have learned a ton about it, and I have written some beautiful novels with a lot of inner thought in it. I think it's a wonderful tool. The thing about inner thought is it's kind of a direct tap into the reader's emotions. So dialogue, the reason dialogue is important, the reason, and it, like, dialogue is character engagement, right? Like two characters engaging with one another is dialogue. It's not the thing in quotations, it's the exchange of expectations and emotions between characters on the page. So the thing in quotations is the verbalization. It's like the verbalization part of that dialogue, but dialogue also includes body language, and it includes inner thought, because the inner thought is that expectation. So what the inner thoughts do on the page is they kind of bring the reader into that dialogue. The pros and cons of that is, the pro is that it can be very intimate, and it can very much, if done well, it can very much expand the reader's voice I'm sorry, it can expand the character's voice in a very powerful way, especially which is very popular right now if you have a very shy character. If you got a shy character, inner thoughts are incredibly important, uh, because they allow the reader insight into what the character is actually saying and doing. Um, But that being said, the con is that as writers, we tend to use them as a crutch. Because when we use them, we can feel the power of, I have this intimacy with the reader. If I do this, I can let the reader directly into thoughts. And we get too direct with it. And the biggest mistake I see authors make is that the interior thought isn't different enough from the exterior vocalization that it actually matters. You should just have the character say it out loud, right? Like, so there's this, like, the character's interior thoughts sound the same as their vocalization. That can become very, I'm going to use a big word. That can become very pedestrian. It can become very like, oh, you're just telling me everything that's happening in this character's head. I think interior thoughts are a great tool if used strategically. So if you have a character that's intentionally withholding, interior thoughts are great. If you have a character that's shy and struggling to vocalize, interior thoughts are great. If you have a character that's masking, like the character is speaking in one way, but actually internalizes in a completely different way, that's a fantastic opportunity to put those thoughts on the page. There's also a lot of different ways to do it. So there's the, like, first person POV in italics, Catherine, like you were saying, that's like the most blatant. Like, hey, there's an extra voice in this scene, and it is my character's brain, right? Like, and I do recommend a writer treat it like an extra voice. So I catch writers all the time where they're like, once every 7 paragraphs, they have an inner thought. As no, if you're going to have an inner thought, that brain is a character in the narrative, and we need to get connected to that brain. So we need to hear from that character as much as we hear the exterior thoughts, right? Like, if you want to figure out a balance, as much as this character vocalizes or more, we should hear in the interior thought. That's one way to do it. Another way that I've seen people do it really beautifully is just give the first person POV narrator asides as they talk. That's the same, right? Like, Elizabeth Gilbert does this beautifully in her novels. She does this, like, first person POV where the narrator usually is in the future telling the story to the reader, and the narrator will have these asides where the narrator explains how things felt, or what they were really thinking, or what was really happening. And like, I said this, but I thought this. That's an interior thought. It's the same. It's just not as direct. And then, I think Chris Cain taught me the phrase third person close, which is what TJ Clune does a lot. Again, another way to tell interior thoughts, where there's a third person narrator that's constantly describing what's happening inside the character's head. So, Linus is the character in, I'm not quoting, I'm just making up, but Linus is the character in The House on the Cerulean Sea, and he'll be like, the boss looked down and said, I don't think this picture is appropriate for your desk. Linus loved the picture, and Didn't care if the picture was appropriate or not, but he said, yes, sir. Like that's a third person close. You're still giving me the interior thought of the character. It's just not in italics or in first person, but in that sense, I still get it. So I think there's a lot. What's beautiful for us as authors is there's 1,000 ways to do it, right? Like, and the question is, I think we all do what's natural to us. That's why I don't do it. I think great authors, of which I would not include myself, but I think great authors are very strategic about it. And they're like, oh, I know that using, like, I remember I worked for a little while doing construction. I was a blacksmith. I try not to say that out loud because the dialoguer community, my dialogue doctor community teases me because I used to say it all the time. I was a blacksmith for a little while, and I worked with this like master blacksmith who had all of these tools. He had like a huge toolbox on the back of his pickup truck, and there was like 1,000 tools in it. And I had no idea what 990 of them were for. Right? Like I was just like, oh, there's the hammer and the screwdriver. I know those two. I'm good to go. He knew what they were all for exactly. So when we got to a job, he'd be like, I need this tool. It's on the bottom shelf. It looks like this. And you could like, and it turns, and I'm like, okay. So I go get the rear tool, and like he would solve the problem he was working on in like 30 seconds because he knew what his tools were for. I think as we grow as authors, understanding the impact of the tools that we could use and how those really can strategically shape the reader's experience in our story is the goal we should all be looking to master. Not that I have mastered it, but that is the goal we should be looking to master. So I think it's that like moving from like, oh, this is where I'm comfortable at, which is where I still am, to like, I understand my tools. I know how to use my tools. I know what these tools do to the reader. So I can, when I want to tell a short story or want to tell a, something else, I pull these tools out. Like I read a lot of Stephen King now, and I see Stephen King doing that. Like he's at that like master level where he's like, he doesn't always write in the same style, in the same format. He always writes in the same genre. Well, not actually, he doesn't. But I can see him using tools in strategic ways where it's like, oh, if I change how I use this character's voice, or if I change how I'm using inner thoughts here, I can really shape the reader's experience with this story. I think that's something we should aspire to. And you're welcome. Another 15-minute answer that could have been 2.
Well,
Acceptable. If
you're
you were to,
okay. Well, you're a 3-story method editor, like Miss Catherine and I. How does that help you?
Challenge
There you
coin,
go.
baby.
Yeah.
Got
For
my
those of
challenge
you who
coin.
can't see the video, he's got a challenge coin. That's right. That's right. How does the 3-story method sort of go along with internal dialogue or with dialogue generally,
So
or
the
does
3-story
it?
method is really about, for me, the
In your
3-story method is
experience?
about scene construction. Like you kind of like, as a writer, you have all these knobs you can turn, right? And the knobs that you turn create this experience for the reader. So if you think about, the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, which is like the coolest sci-fi movie from the 90s ever, where he's got these gloves on and there's like this like holographic computer and he's like moving stuff around. He's like, put that over there and put that over there. He'll like turn this thing up and like this image gets bigger. You have the ability, you have all these knobs at your fingertips, all these ways you can manipulate what the reader sees in their imagination. Characterization, right? Like your character voices, your cast, how those cast players play off of each other. That's like one set of knobs on your dashboard that you can like play with. Plot and like the construction of a story in a scene, that's another set of knobs on your dashboard, right? Emotional triggers is another set of knobs on your dashboard. And they connect, right? Like if you've got, this cast, X cast, it's going to naturally lead to Y conflicts, right? Like if you've got, if you really want, like, the letter 5 emotional triggers, that's really going to lead to like, the number Z plot points. So it's that like combining, you have all these knobs to turn. The 3-story method editing stuff, the focus on a story having conflict, choices, and consequences, that lives in that like plot section of the dashboard for me. So it lives in like the scene construction and the story construction. I know that every scene has to have a conflict, and every scene has to have the character either openly or suggestedly, or like openly, or at least the perception of choices. And then I know that at some point I need to see the consequences on both a micro and macro level, right? And that plays into my cast, but my cast are like different knobs I can turn. And those character voices that build out that cast's personality, they're different knobs I can turn. And like whether I want the emotional tone to be happy or sad or exciting or, suspicious. I don't think that's an emotional tone, but it doesn't matter. Whatever I want that emotional tone to be, I've got those knobs as well. So I would say whatever's easiest for you to start with, that's where you start, and then turn those knobs. So if you need, like, if you're a plotter, it's really easy for you to be like, okay, I can set up a scene. This is the conflict. And then they're going to have to make these choices, and this is the consequence. And then you need to like work the character, and then you need to write the scene and then work the character voices. Do that. If you're better at the character voices knob, put 2 characters in a conversation, get them talking, and then go back and be like, okay, so what's the conflict here? Right. But you have to ask that question. You can't not ask that question. But it's just about like whatever's easiest for you, do that first and then go back. But does that answer the question? Like, I see them as like different areas you can play in to make your story what you want it to make. So when we say story, to make the reader's experience what you want the reader's imaginative journey to be. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
That
glad it
makes
makes sense
sense.
to you.
How do you, as an editor, yeah, it actually does, believe it or not. As an editor, do you have a method that helps people write dialogue or write internal dialogue in particular, since that's
Yeah,
what we're
it's
sort of
interesting.
talking about?
Something I've learned about myself is that I'm not actually an editor. I'm a coach. And those are different things. Um, an editor looks at your piece, whether it's a short story and they're like a line editor and they're looking for grammar, or they're a developmental editor and they're looking for like structure, or they're a diagnostic editor, like a 3-story method editor, and they're doing like a diagnostic read of your story. An editor looks at the story and is improving the story, and as a second hand is working on you as a writer, right? Like through the experience of the story. I actually work the writer first. So I don't take editing clients anymore. I only take coaching clients. I'll do a one-time coaching session with you, or I'll do like multiple. You can book me for like 4 sessions at a time. Um, and when I do that, I'm looking, like, you always send me words. When I look at those words, I'm like, okay, which panel of the dashboard to really take this illustration and just like slam it with a dead horse as many times as I can, because that's what that metaphor means. When I'm looking at the dashboard, which aspect of the dashboard are you already doing really well? And which aspect of the dashboard do you need to improve on? And then typically at the first of the conversation that I have with a coaching client, I'm like, what do you want to learn? Because if you don't want to learn the emotional trigger side of the dashboard, it doesn't matter how much I talk about it. If you don't care, I'm like, we need to really like work on the emotional flow of this. And you're like, so if you don't care about that, then it doesn't matter. But so coaches look at the client and they're like, how can I help you improve as a writer? I tell my coaching clients a lot, we likely won't finish a book together. We'll likely do like 8 sessions, and then I won't have anything to coach you on it for a while. Now, I do have clients that I take through a whole book, and I find most of that becomes because we just really enjoy working together and it's fun. So like we just keep going. But I also have clients where I'm like, I need 4 sessions and I need to work on my character voice. And so we spend 4 sessions, just all of my edits, all of my comments are about like, hey, let me help you find tools that you can use as an author to improve your character voice. So that's what I do as a coach over an editor, if that makes sense. So the 3-story method for me is just another it was another way, another deep learning for me. Well, I mean, I signed on to it for the community because you guys, I like hanging out with you guys. But for me, it was, and I'm super loyal. I'm a 6 on the Enneagram. So Jay was like, I'm doing this new thing. And I'm like, I'm there, Jay. Anything you do. So you and me, ride or die, baby. Because that's just how I roll. So I have my community and I'm ride or die. But that being said, like, I tried editing and I'm just not good at it because I end up like wanting to get the author on a call and be like, hey, let's talk about the decisions you're making in this piece. And they're like, no, I really just want you to send me the edits. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't. My editing comments won't actually make any sense to you because a lot of times my editing comments are like, what's the choice you're making here? Like, did you mean to do this? Like, that's the kind of, like, I will just leave that in the page. Like, did you mean to do this? And that's when I realized, like, these aren't helpful edits. These are something that this is coaching. This is it. So yeah, so that's just where I naturally bend. It also is because I have a deep desire to see people succeed. So, and I don't think that success, as somebody who's written 13 novels and, like, 7 of them have been read by like 50 people. I don't think that success is based on the one book. So yeah, all that to say, I would rather work with the author than the piece, which is why I would say I'm a coach, not an editor. And the 3-story method stuff is just one of those knobs that I've had to master because I didn't. I read the story grid. I obsessed over the story grid. I read Save the Cat. I obsessed over the Save the Cat system. And then Save the Cat Writes a Novel came out. I obsessed over the Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I read Robert McKee's story. Like, I had studied all this stuff before the 3-story method. I really think the 3-story method is the simplest way to get at it. So it gave me a language to use with coaching clients that I can be like, okay, let's talk about that. But when people come to me for like a story diagnostic, I'm like, you should call Aaron or Miss Catherine because they're actual editors. I don't. You don't want my notes. My notes are going to be like, really? And then you're going to be like, what does that even mean? Yeah. So Aaron, I forgot your question. But I'll keep talking. I'll keep talking if you want me to. You're on mute, Catherine.
Catherine, you're muted.
I feel like now I've stunned Aaron into silent laughter, and I've somehow magically made Miss Catherine mute. I have won this podcast. You have to turn your pink slips over to me. I don't know what a pink slip for a podcast was. You're still muted because I'm still winning. You have to turn your pink. I don't know what that is.
You can.
That's right. It's like
you can have my hat.
We've raced. Grease Lightning. So, my Grease Lightning has beaten your unnamed cars because Grease Lightning, I'm pretty sure, is the only car in that movie. You're still muted. I'm just going to keep talking. I'm pretty sure it's the only. Victory's mine. I'm pretty sure it's the only car in that movie with a name. So I'm Grease Lightning, and you're the unnamed cars that I now own the pink slips of because I've won the podcast. You didn't know this was a competition when I came on, did you? You're still muted. It's hysterical, though. You look so frustrated. It's a shame, though, because I love talking to you. I'll just pretend like I can hear you. Do you want me to do voices? You can move your mouth. And I'll be like, Jeff, why are you so awesome? There's an awesomeness of the most amazing and great. And yes.
Okay, so.
All right, Eric, go for it. Sorry.
God, save me. Okay, you talked a little bit about this, about how internal dialogue needs to be a character or the brain needs to be a character. Do the voices need to match?
So character voices stem. So like, if you think about your character in 3 different components, your character's background, your character's personality, and your character's voice, Catherine's typing now. We're all in big trouble. She's figured out a way to communicate outside of talking. Dang it. Doesn't mean I have to read it. So if you I'm just kidding. I'm teasing. If you have all people who are like, man, this guy's a jerk. I don't ever want to hear him again. If you have those three components, background, personality, and voice, the background is kind of where I recommend, well, where a lot of writers start. It's like what they're great at is where, is like building these big story Bibles of background. So if you start with the background and then move to, uh, the, the personality, like based on what that character's experienced, based on their family history, based on their genetics, based on their place in culture, based on how the outside world perceives them, based on how they perceive themselves, what is the personality kind of blooming out of that? Like, how are they responding to all of that? And then that personality is then expressed through a voice. The internal and external voice both need to come out of that personality. You can't have separate. So, like, if you're going to use the Enneagram, because I mentioned it earlier, and you're like, my character is a one. It's a very black and white thinker. That's like, they're called the perfectionist. They have an internal critic, right? Your character can have like masked their voice so that they never externally express that internal critic, but that internal narrative that you're giving to the reader better be that internal critic if that's the personality you're going for. Does that make sense? So whatever that personality is, or if you're using Strengths Finder, right? And like you're like, okay, I want a character who's, let's find a weird one from my own strengths. I want a character whose main strength is context. They're obsessed with the past, right? So like if your character's obsessed with the past, their external voice needs to talk about things that happened before, and their internal voice needs to be obsessed with worry about the future lining up with the past. Does that make sense? So like your external internal voice need to align on the personality, because what you're doing, and here's where I think most writers miss what the tool that internal voice is. What internal voice is you're saying like, hey, you already have the external voice, right? Like you can already get from this character everything that you'll get from every other character in the book, but I'm also going to give you this bonus voice. And so the bonus voice needs to add to the reader's engagement and intimacy with the character in some way. It needs to give the reader insight into who that character is and why that character is making the choices they make, and like why the consequences that those choices are causing, are either bringing growth or stifling growth for that character, right? Like, so it's like you got to use it as a strategic tool. If you're just throwing an internal voice in there because it helps you communicate emotional tone, I would say do better. No, I'm just kidding. That's a terrible thing to say. I would say think strategically. Sorry, I'm just kidding. I wanted to see your face. I would say think strategically about, how you're using it, and try to enhance the reader's experience with your character through that internal voice. I didn't mean do better. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm really wound up tonight. All right, Miss Catherine has a question. Can I ask Miss Catherine's questions, Aaron? Or are we just going to ignore that she's here altogether and like just pretend like we
Absolutely,
can't
feel
read?
free. Since we can't hear her, we've got
Yeah,
we've got
she's
audio
still
problems with
yelling.
Miss Catherine again this week.
It's
So
yeah. Maybe after I leave, she can have her pink slip to the podcast back. Um, all right, Miss Catherine asks, as one dyslexic writer to another. That's a terrible voice. You don't sound anything like that. I don't know why. Just a higher pitch is better. But I guess if I had done like a lower pitch, that would even be worse. All right, as one dyslexic writer to another, any tricks for writing and editing that people can use? Yeah, if you're dyslexic, don't write. I'm just kidding. I totally write. No, I think, for me, I haven't found any tricks. I don't know. I would ask you that question because I haven't really found any, but you can't answer me because you don't have a voice. So sorry, podcast listeners. Short out of luck. And the podcast ended sad. No, so I don't know. For me, typing is better than writing by hand. If I write by hand, I reverse everything. I flip all my letters. I like flip my words. So typing for some reason, typing seems to mitigate that for me. I don't know why. I also can't, for some reason. Oh yeah, go ahead.
do you have trouble? I was going to say, when you're typing, do you have trouble with homophones? Words that are spelled differently and mean different
Yeah, I
things
mean,
but sound
those
the
are the
same
best.
there, and there?
Can I cuss on this podcast? I'm sorry, I just did. You can edit me out. Aaron's like, oh, I'm cutting
Yes.
this down to 10 minutes. So yeah, no, I do have trouble with homophones. The biggest problem though is that I can't see them. So um, I will write words backwards. Um, which is a weird thing, but when I'm typing, I will literally just type a word backwards. So finding great spell checks are really good for me. Um, the problem is though, like I said, is I'm writing and editing at the same time. So like I'll write a word backwards and then immediately stop my flow and fix it. And not because I saw it, but because this red line appears underneath it, and I'm like, oh, so it does slow me down a lot. Again, don't do what I do. So, but I do think finding good writing partners, like people who are willing to like read your work and catch that nonsense, is really helpful as dyslexic writer. Um, my partner Laura, who does the Dialogue Doctor podcast with me and like is also a Dialogue Doctor coach, we started working on stuff together. She was my main editor, and she was the one kind of catching all that stuff for me, which was incredibly generous and magnanimous of her. The higher we can elevate her on a pedestal, the better it is. So, but I'm out of great words. She's awesome. So yeah, but that's I would say try to find partners that can help you with that. I was just very lucky to have somebody who's like, I don't want to read stuff, but I like to write it. Um, yeah, so that's what would be my only recommendation. Pain and suffering. My
Cool.
recommendation for dyslexic writers:
Oh,
be prepared for pain and suffering. Yeah, and don't think readers are going to take sympathy on you because you're dyslexic. They do not care. They do not care. They're heartless. I love them. Heartless bastards. But I love them. Oh, dude, they will. They
but
will
they will
send
email
you.
you about your
They will
errors.
send you. And God bless them. I love indie publishing because when I get one of those emails, you better believe I crack that thing open. I make all of those edits and I push that thing right back up. I like, that's what's great about indie publishing is I'm in control of the versions. So if you send me an email, it's like, hey, I caught 24 misspelled words in your last in your last novel. I'm like, could you like tell me the words? Because I will fix them all. I will fix all of them right now, and I will. I'll fix them in a night.
I
I know,
still
it's
have that
great.
line edit
I
I
haven't
did
fixed
from
that one
Inside
yet.
Outside.
That one's I'm still too emotionally attached to that one to actually look at it again. So I'm just letting that sit right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then I
please
won't
don't.
send you
You'll
the
make me
rest of the
cry.
chapters I haven't
Miss
sent
Catherine
you.
said she has an alpha reader who laughs and reads my mistakes out loud to me. Yeah, those are the best and worst people. They are. They're the best. They are the best of times and the worst of times. When somebody's willing to like, hey, I found all these errors in your book. Like, thank you. Oh yeah. So best of times and the worst of times. I
Is there
mean,
anything we didn't cover?
Catherine's like, why would you ask this guy that question? This is not the guy to ask that question to. No, I don't think so. I'm trying to think about it. We focused on inner thoughts. I'm trying to think about anything specifically about inner thoughts we didn't cover. We talked about the need to be strategic with them, about using them with a character voice. I think that what most writers do is they start with the exterior voice and then go to the interior voice. So they're like, oh, my character sounds like this, and then I'm going to add these feelings in the inside. I actually recommend you flip. Um, I would say you start with the inside and go outside. So, like, start with that interior voice, decide what that interior voice based on the personality sounds like, and then decide what aspects of that interior voice get vocalized. I think that's a better way to go about it. Decide, like, I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially in kind of our current cultural conversations around classes. Miss Catherine, I know one of your themes is race that you write about. So like, and racism. I think even in like stuff like sci-fi, the idea of masking, I think is a really important thing that interior voice can help with. Where you have, like I grew up in the inner city, and I know a lot of a lot of the friends that I grew up with had an interior, had a like community voice, as in like this is who I am and this is how I talk, and then like a teacher voice. Whereas like when I'm speaking with a teacher, I mask how I actually speak, because there's cultural expectations placed upon me that have less to do about my intelligence and have more to do with forcing me into a specific culture. Um, I mean, if we really want to get mean about it, that have to do with colonizing me. I think there's some real opportunities there. Like that's the kind of thing where like I would want a writer to be like, yeah, I'm strategically going to use this interior voice to demonstrate how masking works. Like that's, man, that would be a powerful. Yeah. Yeah. So Miss Catherine says the customer service voice. Um, Miss Catherine right now is operating as my interior voice. She says the customer service voice. Yeah, it's that works too. Like you have your work voice and your actual voice. So if you have to be a certain, if you want to take it away from race, you have to be a certain person at work and then your actual voice. But that's what I'm saying. Like get that actual voice down first, get that interior voice down first, and then decide what that exterior vocalization sounds like, what that character's willing to vocalize, what they're not willing to vocalize, because at some point at the big dramatic moment in the story, that guard is going to come down and that internal voice is going to get vocalized. And that's either the big home run, like if it's a shy character that's been holding back, that's the big like yes, or if it's a character that's been masking something about themselves, it's a big like, ooh, you just let that out loud, and what are the consequences of that choice, right? Like so, but using that into your voice strategically. And Miss Catherine asks, italicize or not italicize? That is the question. Is it nobler of the mind? I'm just kidding. So to italicize or not italicize, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. That's the thing. My crusade against italics has nothing to do with italics. It has to do with inconsistency. So my crusade against italics is, if you're going to use italics, and this, I'm just going to rant. You ask me if there's anything else I want to talk about. This is what I want to talk about, Aaron. Buckle up. We're going to be here for an hour. Um, if you're gonna if you're gonna use italics, you get to use them for one thing. You cannot use italics for a character's voice. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can write your whole book in italics. I see you. What's his name? Who wrote that great dystopian novel that's all in italics? Man, The Road. I see you, The Road. You can write your whole book in italics if you want. I don't care. Do what you're gonna do. Just don't expect me to read it. I'm just kidding. I love that book. It's a beautiful book. So, stay on target. Um, the italics, if you're going to use italics to demonstrate an internal voice, it gets very complicated for the reader if you're then also using italics to like, oh, this character has a weird accent in my space novel, so I'm going to give all of the characters who speak in this accent italics as well. And now as a reader, I'm like, okay, wait, is this italics space voice or is this italics internal voice? What is this italics? And or like sometimes this italics is internal voice, and then but every once in a while I'm gonna use this italics to also emphasize a word. Okay, am I supposed to hear that word? Like, did they not say that word? Like, what are you doing with these? So consistency is what's important. It is like italics is like a hammer, and I think sometimes as writers, we love our hammer, so we just walk around whacking on all the walls with our hammer. And it's like you didn't need to hit that wall with that hammer. You didn't. You just made a hole in the wall. You didn't need to do that. You're ruining our house. That's what the reader's saying to you. You're ruining. We were in a nice house, and then you started hitting things with your italics hammer, and now you've ruined our house. Um, but it is about consistency. So like, the Murderbot novels, I cannot remember her name, the author that wrote those. They are really great sci-fi. Man, she's using brackets and parentheses and italics, and like she's got every tool, but it's consistent. And after I read the first chapter, my brain will click and I'll be like, I know what all of these things are. Right? Like, and that's the thing, is that when you're using these tools to create this imaginative journey for a reader, what you're doing is you're you and the reader are developing a common language about what these things mean. So italics has a meaning in your book, and if you're using italics to mean like 5 different things, you're just making it hard on the reader. So my crusade isn't against italics; it's against italics used for different things in books. But that's also true of like parentheses and brackets and whatever you want to do. It is weird though. You'll be reading a book and you and the author get that common language together, and then you just start to click into it. Like I remember the first time I read Jose Saramago, who doesn't use any punctuation. And I'm looking at the page, I'm like, this is the weirdest. I don't even know how to read this. And I just started reading it. Sure enough, by like page 2, it's like in my brain. I can see it. I know who's talking when. I know when someone's talking. I know when it's prose. Like you just start to see it. And you're just like, oh yeah, this is some weird, beautiful mind crap going on. But so like that, just to say, like, there are no rules. It's about you creating an experience for the reader. So whatever that experience is, that's what you want the reader to do. Like that's what you want the reader to journey on. I lost my words now. They're gone. It's over. Me and Miss Catherine, neither of us can say real words.
Thank you,
anymore.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. Where can we find you on the internet?
I'm on dialoguedoctor.com. You can find me at dialoguedoctor.com for writers. If you want to come and grind with me in fiction, come buy all 12 of my novels. You can buy all of them. You'll get 4 different genres. One series splits genre in the middle because I just got tired of urban fantasy. And I was like, now we're writing something else. So come join my crazy at jeffelkinswriter.com. But for writers, dialoguedoctor.com is where you find all the things. There's a free Tuesday newsletter that often comes out on Wednesday or Thursday. There's also a Patreon group that you can subscribe to. And then there's the weekly podcast if you want to listen to this kind of nonsensical rambling every week. As I say, my motto is, you'll be sorry. But yeah, come join me.
Well, we will do that. I love your podcast. I really appreciate your unique style. It's fun to listen to.
No,
it is.
I'm super excited y'all are doing this. I think you're both amazing editors. I think you have a lot to offer to the world. So I have worked with both of you individually for a long time. For a year, I've worked with both of you individually, but I've seen both of your work as writers, and I've seen you edit, and I think you have a ton of wisdom to offer to the writing community. So I'm very excited that you've decided to share your magical wizardry with the rest of us. It's great. So, and thanks for having me on. This was exciting.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, I'm V.E. Griffith. You can find me at vegriffith.com, and you can find Miss Catherine at scribes-pen.com, even when she can't talk. Thanks very much. Have a good night.